Thank you, all of you, for joining us after the ceremony that focused on overcoming fear and hate together, showing the way to reconciliation and liberation, in solidarity with families who paid the highest price for this conflict that is fueled by hate and occupation. My name is Gili Getz. I'm proud to serve as a board member of Combatants for Peace, the American Friends of Combatants for Peace. I speak to you from New York. I'm honored to serve on the board with Aziz, who's also here with us. If you'd like to, Combatants for Peace is one of the organizations that put this joint memorial ceremony together every year. If you'd like to join and know more about it, please let us know in the chat, follow our email list. In this conversation, we're going to talk about overcoming oppression from the US to Palestine. I'm honored to introduce to you two incredible human beings who will share their deeply inspiring story of overcoming fear and hate, going through personal transformation into self-empowerment and personal liberation, while living in deeply oppressive and unjust reality. So let me, without further ado, introduce them. Aziz Abu Sarah is a well-known Palestinian activist, journalist, and social entrepreneur. Eldra Jackson III is a speaker, a healer, an activist whose work focused on racial justice in the prison system. Let's just jump right to it. Aziz, if we can start with you and your story and journey that got you to this work and to speak to us today.
Second, I'll start by just telling my story, and then I see some people already asking questions, so we'll get to that, I think, in the second part, although I'll try to, if you send me anything right now, I'll try to touch on it while I'm speaking. As I said to Gili earlier, today was kind of a little bit of a shocker for me, because I heard Muna speak, who's her son is a cousin of mine who was killed when I was 20 years old. And this is, I think, the crazy part of living in a place like Jerusalem. You don't have just your own personal tragedy. Too often you have so many people around you who have that tragedy, friends, family, and I can count multiple people in my family, unfortunately, who have, in my larger family, cousins and second cousins who have gone through the same thing. I grew up in Jerusalem. I'm the youngest of 7, and my story with loss or with oppression started very young, before I even really understood what does any of this means. And I'll tell you a quick story about that. I remember when I went to school, I came once home, and I was maybe 8 years old, and I told my mom that I'm quitting school. I just got home, put my books on the table, and I said, listen, this whole school idea, it's a terrible idea, and I'm not going back anymore. And she's like, well, one, you're 8 years old, you can't decide, 8 or 9, something like that. You can decide not going back to school. But what happened? And my point was, well, is school worth dying for? Because at that day, I was shot tear gas on, and I felt like I was going to suffocate, and I had to run away. This is just after I left school. There were clashes with soldiers. They fired tear gas. And it's, I went home and I told my mom, I'm afraid to go to school. I don't want to go to school. And I didn't really know much about Israel, Palestine, I was too young to fully understand nationalism, to understand oppression, to understand any of that. I just knew I don't want to die. And my mom explained to me that I can't make that decision. For a while, one of my brothers would take me to school, and then she started giving me an onion every morning when I went to school. And that was her way of helping me overcome my fear. And, I often thought about it from my own perspective, and I think about it now from my mother perspective was sending her son, telling him it's not dangerous when she knew it actually is, but she knew also it's important that I go to school. And her way of helping me was saying, if you cut an onion and you put it close to your nose when you fire tear gas at, it will help you not suffocate. And unfortunately, I had to use that onion way too many times. And it did give me a little bit of, I don't know if you want to call it comfort. I don't know even if it's really works or not, if it's a placebo or real, but it gave me something to stick to. And that's how I grew up. That was my normal interactions on daily basis. When I was 10 years old, my brother was killed. He was beaten up in prison when he was arrested from home on suspicion of throwing rocks. He refused to confess to the charges, and he was beaten up until he eventually did. By the time he was released from prison, he was pretty much on his deathbed. He was 19 years old at that time. As I said, I was 10. And he died in the hospital a few days after a surgery as a result of internal bleeding. And being 10 years old, watching your brother being killed is it's hard to explain to you how painful that is, especially when it was the brother who's just older than me, the one who, when I mentioned to you I was afraid to go to school, he was the one who would take me to school. He's the one who really functioned more as a parent than he functioned as a brother. And I was angry, I was bitter, and I wanted revenge. And that's how I grew up. This was the main focus of my life until when I was 18 years old, I went to study Hebrew and went through a transformation in my Hebrew class as I met Israelis and Israeli Jews who for the first time, I met Israeli Jews who were against occupation. That to me was actually such I know a lot of Israelis often tell me there are so many of us who work for peace, but not many Palestinians. And I often tell them, maybe I didn't see any of you growing up. That's the thing. We all live in our own communities and don't see what happens on the other side. And for me to meet an Israeli who treated me like a human being, I was 18 years old when that first time happened. And that did make a lot of difference for me. It made a difference in the sense I realized that this us Palestinians versus them Israelis isn't the way we fight against injustice, that we should be unified when it comes to injustice. Israelis and Palestinians who fight on the same side against injustice are not on opposite sides. The fact that you have different religion, different nationality, different ethnicity doesn't really matter whatsoever. What does matter where you stand on these issues. Do you believe in equality? Do you believe in justice? Do you believe that it's for you as much as it is for me? And when I met people like that, it completely changed my mind, because I started seeing it as the us versus them is us, those of us who believe in justice, those of us who believe in coexistence, those of us who believe in peace, and then them, it's those who don't believe in that yet. And that's my goal, is to find ways to put cracks in those walls that divide us. Talking about the United States to Palestine, I've lived in both, and I see a lot of similarities. Actually, Martin Luther King Jr. Has said a lot of things that worked so well, worked for the civil rights, still works today, but works so well for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, when he says we fear each other, we hate each other because we fear each other. We fear each other because we don't know each other, because we are separated, because we don't know how to communicate with each other. And so whatever happens there is there, and whatever happens here is here. And there's a lot of learning that we have to do on how to overcome oppression in our own communities, hatred in our own communities, but also figuring out ways to work together rather than working against each other. I saw few comments here. Actually, maybe I'll stop, Gili. I prefer to speak less and get Eldra to talk, and then maybe we can answer those questions after, if that's all right.
Thank you so much, Aziz. And yeah, we'll get to questions after. This work of joint mourning and joint resistance takes deep a process of transformation and self-empowerment. And Eldra, if you can tell your incredible story, but tell us a little bit about that process of self-empowerment under oppression and the incredible wisdom you can share with us.
Thank you, Gilly. Again, thank you for inviting me and Inside Circle here today. And it's a little difficult for me to speak from this space. And for me, I believe that that's what self-empowerment is. In overcoming oppression, we're dealing with a situation here in the United States right now where unfortunately another young man, Dante Wright, just lost his life. With his mother listening to him get shot in the chest while he was on the phone with her. In a city where an officer is on trial for crushing the life out of a Black man. And as I show up here today, I show up from a space of wanting peace, not just for myself, but to support spaces of peace for other people. Because I know what's possible. I'm somebody that, as a Black man in America, I'm not a saint. I never have been. I served 24 years of a life sentence in the California prison system. I was involved in gangs early in my life. First time I went to jail, I was 14 years old. And I knew what race was. I knew what oppression was, but I had luckily lived enough of a sheltered environment where I had only seen it and experienced it sporadically. I can remember going and visiting my grandparents in Clear Lake, and I was the oldest cousin charged with taking all of the rest of the little cousins down to the lake. So we were walking like ducks. I was 10, 11 years old. And some individuals in a lifted pickup truck with a Confederate flag drove by and called us a bunch of niggers. And the only thing that was running through my mind was, I can definitely get away. I had faith in my ability and my speed to be able to get away. But I had people with me who were as young as 3 years old. So my concern was making certain that I could get them to safety. When I started to engage in the criminal justice system, race and oppression really became a part of my life. The first time I went to jail, I remember going to eat, and it was hamburger day. And I was told that I could not eat the hamburgers because the white boys had cooked today. So since their hands had touched the food, the Blacks and the Hispanics were not allowed to eat. And this went on and on throughout my tours throughout the criminal justice system. And Inside Circle was born in 1996 following a racial riot in Folsom Prison, New Folsom Prison. And when I say a racial riot, I'm talking about 40 minutes of mortal combat on a concrete yard. The whites and the Hispanics against the Blacks, waiting, hoping, praying for this incident to end. And when the governor finally gave permission to quell the incident, the permission was firing live rounds from Mini 14 assault rifles with NATO tumbler rounds coming out from the end of them. A Hispanic man was shot to death. Several other people were taken via helicopter to local area hospitals. And a man named Patrick Nolan, who was formerly of the Aryan Brotherhood, had begun to do his own interpersonal work. He had begun to read things by Viktor Frankl, by Martin Luther King, by Nelson Mandela. And he had begun to look into what's known in this country as men's work. And when that lockdown came up, he went around to various leaders of organizations on the yard and asked for permission to, if not get the leaders to come to what he was trying to get put together, allow them to not penalize their people for coming to what he was trying to put together. And that was the first time in the history of this country that you had Bloods and Crips in the same room together, Northern and Southern Chicanos, Aryan Brotherhood and Black Guerrilla Family all sitting in the same room, and nobody was trying to kill one another. And what we learned how to do in those spaces, number one, was recognize that we were all victims of trauma, recognize that we all had some sort of trauma that we were dealing with. And so as I was able to recognize the trauma that I had been subject to throughout my life and start to deal with that and start to step in those spaces and support others as they started to step into the spaces of their own trauma, it helped me begin to see the humanity in others, and it helped others begin to see the humanity in me. It's very difficult for me to want to see harm come to someone when I can see myself in that other person. It's very difficult for me to want to kill somebody when I recognize that other individual as my brother or my sister, when I know that other individual's mother's name. We have a saying at Inside Circle that goes, hurt people, and healed people, heal people. What we learned in those circles is that not a lot of people who are humans, there are not a lot of people who are humans that are not dealing with some form of hate, some form of fear, and it comes from hurt. And as we sat together and began to see each other and see the light in each other, I begin to heal, and it provides the space for me to support others in finding their own healing.
Thank you so much, Eldra, for these words. I want to ask you, on this day that we mourn, some of the speakers in the ceremony did point to the universal message of this ceremony, of this coming together. And I want to ask you, how do you see the struggle for racial justice and equality in the U.S. in the fight for Palestinian freedom as interrelated? There is a universal element to this transformation, again, under oppressive systems. This is not a reconciliation that comes post-conflict. We're in the midst of a conflict and oppression. How do you see this connection between the struggle for racial justice in America and the Palestinian struggle for freedom and equality? If you can touch on the universality of these struggles.
Yeah, well, I think that there's a famous saying: injustice somewhere is injustice everywhere, right? So when we allow injustice to happen, it doesn't only affect one group, it eventually grows and affects way more people. And when we are silent about injustice in one area, it means we are silent about it everywhere. It means we're hypocrites. And that's why you see, it makes sense to me that why in the civil rights movement, there were a lot of Jews involved, because they have gone through so much injustice and they thought we have to be involved in the civil rights. But that's also why you see a lot of Palestinians today involved in the movement, Black Lives Matter, for example, seeing a lot of connections, not necessarily that it's identical and it's exactly the same struggle, but saying, okay, oppression here, I need to stand with you regardless, not just because I'm suffering, then I need to focus only on my issue. Actually, it's the opposite. We have to be united and saying, you're suffering, my suffering, together, let's help end all of it. Let's help end discrimination here, help end discrimination over in Israel and Palestine. And then you see also I have so many potential actually stories here, but like even today you heard Tucker Carlson, I think it was Gilly on your Facebook, Tucker Carlson using what's happening to Palestinians, saying, hey, if people say demographic threat is a problem in Israel and it's acceptable when they talk about Palestinians, hey, they are a demographic threat, they are a problem, how can we be a Jewish country with all these Palestinians making too many babies? So on, if that's acceptable there, then why shouldn't it be acceptable here in America? And why are, you know, the right-wing American Jews saying it's a right to say it, or left-wing American Jews who might not really connect that to, who would say, yeah, Palestinians are a demographic threat in Palestine, but immigrants coming to America are not demographic threats to white people here. They're saying, well, it is the same. And it's kind of ironic coming from him, and he was justifying his replacement theory in it. But that's how connected the world is. Bad ideas travel and good ideas travel. And our hope is we can learn from each other. I grew up being inspired as I started doing my peace work, inspired by the work that is done by African Americans here, the work for justice that's happening in the United States. To me, that's very inspirational. And I've actually written about it quite a bit in Arabic for Palestinian newspapers, because I wanted to say, look, yeah, it's not identical, but there's so much we can learn about how they mobilize. We can learn so much about how they brought the whole community together, how they were one hand in how they were able to achieve a change. There's so much we can learn from the civil rights movement, and there's so much we can learn from today and what's happening today. So absolutely.
In Combatants for Peace, there's a lot of stories of Palestinians who in jail start reading Martin Luther King, start reading about nonviolence. And that was the genesis of their transformation. And these stories are so interconnected. Eldra?
For me, the only difference is geography. The common thread is we are all humans, and I have yet to run across a human who does not desire to be seen and who does not desire to be heard. My father was in the military. I was a military brat, got the opportunity to grow up traveling the world, going to different military bases. And I remember in the 70s, watching the Palestinian and Israeli conflicts, watching what to my 5, 6, 7-year-old mind was tanks running over people who were armed with slingshots and rocks. And you see it here in this country today. You see it in the USA today. It is people, we have people here who are dying, literally dying to be heard, literally dying to be seen, and begging simply to be treated as human beings. If we exist in a world where we have systems that are designed and allow the dehumanization of a segment of people, over time, what happens is it makes it easy to rationalize knocking those people off, doing things to those people, treating them as less than human. So as long as we have systems that historically are designed to objectify human beings and make them something that is less than and turn them into the other, then it's very easy for people who like to say that they are woke, or who like to say that they are not racist or are not a part of the problem, to be able to look the other way because it's not on their doorstep. So the way that I see it is that the struggle is very much the same. It's very much similar. It is human beings trying to be seen, trying to be heard, and demanding that they be treated as human beings. That's all. Not better than, not more than. Don't give me more than I have coming, but treat me like a human being.
Can I just add one more thing? There's an amazing story I heard from a Jewish friend of mine who, and it shows you how these whole stories that travel. We were in Jerusalem together, and he was asking questions, and one of the Israelis in the group said, well, you know, Palestinians here get way better treatment than Palestinians in Syria or Palestinians in because, you know, there's a war going on in Syria, and was making those kind of comments. And this man said, he's an older gentleman, and he said, you know, I started applying for work back in the 50s, I think 40s, 50s, in all these companies in America. And I was treated really, really bad in the 40s. And he ended up working for IBM, and he was having just a really terrible, you know, got paid less. He was always looked at down. He was yelled at. And he said, when I would complain and say, why are you treating me like this? They would look at me and say, you are being treated way better than Jews are treated in Germany. You are treated way better than Jews are treated in Poland. You are treated way better. So don't complain. It's like, whenever I hear people say that to one group, it reminds me of what I went through. And again, it's not, again, a comparison, what's better and what's worse. It's always looking at ourselves and say, how can we achieve justice without saying, are we just better than the worst we can find? Or are we really looking at what the values that we believe in? Is it just we need to be better, or do we need to strive toward justice for everyone?
Thank you so much, Aziz. And I'd like to offer anybody who would like to ask a question, just put your name in the chat and we can unmute you and you'll join the conversation. I'd like to ask you, in this process of seeing the other, of engaging the other, the enemy, in this process, we come across often as in the dangers of normalizing the oppressive system. Once we engage with the other who's a source of our oppression or sources of the violence that done to us, whether we're Israelis and Palestinians, in some way, how do we not entrench that oppressive system, but self-empower and liberate in this process of seeing the other as a human being and engaging in in their humanity? How do we bypass that challenge of not legitimizing the system that's a source of our oppression, but engaging in that transformation as empowering ourselves and empowering a better future? Anyone can take that if.
For me, and in my experience, systems are only as strong as the people allow them to be. So as long as I'm feeding into the system, then the system exists. It has control and it has the ability to oppress and control. What I can do is take agency over my own life. I can take agency over how I want to show up in the world. I have a 5-year-old son, and I can make a choice about how I want to show up and how I want to model for him what the world can be. Yes, the world is what it is, and I have my experiences in the world, and I don't have to allow my trauma and the things that have stymied me in the past to pass on to that next generation. So I can model to him who I want to be, and in that, see the light in others and treat others the way in which I would like to be treated myself. But better yet, treat other people in the way in which they desire to be treated, not me assuming how they ought to be treated, because I don't know how you want to be treated, Gilly. What I can do is ask you what works for you. How do you want to be treated? And then we can go from there. And I'll give you a brief example. You know, I spoke about my background in prison. Racism is a big part of the California prison system. Separation and segregation is a big piece of that. And I was in a maximum security prison when I started doing this work. And for the decade that I was in that particular prison, because of the work that was being done there was not one incident across racial lines for 10 years. And this was a yard that's known as shoe kickout, security housing unit. When you get out of administrative segregation, you get out of the hole, this is the yard that they send you to begin to decompress and reorient you back into the general population. So everybody here is doing life and has a very bad attitude. But because of the sort of work that was going on in that chapel, it trickled down into the culture, into the system of the prison. All 900 individuals were not involved in this circle work. There were maybe 80 people, but you had enough key influencers who were involved that it was enough to change the system.
Right. I fully agree. I think, look, this is a big issue for Palestinians. What is normalization? And I have a bit a different take that quite a few of my Palestinian probably friends and colleagues. I think normalization isn't talking to Israelis, isn't reaching out and saying, let's talk about how do we make a change. Normalization is doing nothing about the system that's happening, about the injustice that's happening. So I reach out to Israelis, people on the left and people on the right. I engage with people because you're not going to change system unless you work with the people who are going to change it. And I think for me, Israelis are the main people who will change those systems. I need to work with Israelis. I need to work with Americans. But am I being, and this is a question always I have to ask myself, am I being honest, or am I changing my message to fit in? That's when it becomes normalization. Am I trying to be the cool Arab who every Israeli and Jew will like me because I'm not challenging, I'm not saying anything that will upset people. I'm not going to say, hey, there is an occupation. I'm not saying, and there are these, and I understand that that's very frustrating for many Palestinians when they watch a Palestinian doing that. It feels like, what's wrong? Why are you not being honest? Why are you not really saying what's happening? So as long as you're still working together, speaking about how to change those systems, working together on how to change those systems. And I think Combatants for Peace, Parent Circle, these are organizations who, we meet with each other, we talk, we like each other, we are friends, but we're also working on making concrete changes on the ground, and we can point to those changes. And that's absolutely not normalization. When I was writing my last book, I met with Daryl Davis, who became a friend, and he's known in the United States as a guy who convinced members of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, to leave that organization and change their way of thinking. And from our perspective, some could look at him meeting with somebody this racist who's, he told me they would sit with him and tell him like, your brain is smaller than ours. You only just living off welfare. Totally stereotypical nonsense stuff, racist stuff. And he said, I'd listen, and then I'd say, can you hear now what I have to say? And most of them would say, I've never talked to a Black person before. I never talked to someone from that group that I dedicated my whole life to hate so much. And I'm so convinced about all these truths, about them. It's like, I'll sit with them. And it wasn't one time, it wasn't two times. And one of the stories he told me of how he convinced a whole state leader of leaving that organization and closing that chapter. That's dismantling a system. And he did it by engaging. He didn't do it by just talking about them to someone else. That doesn't work. We need to work together and engage those systems and say, we're going to work on changing. I want to have a chance of convincing you. I want to have a chance of having a dialogue. I want you to know the results of that system on me. And to many Israelis, when I talk about my story and the stories of my family, they have no idea what I'm talking about. I mean, no Israeli newspaper reported last 3-4 days ago a Palestinian kid in Hebron losing his eye because a soldier shot in him. I didn't find it in any media. It might have eventually gotten some. But most Israelis don't hear those stories. And so when they see the anger people have, they're like, why are Arabs so angry? Well, yeah, they'll feel like that because they didn't know. And it's I feel like it is something I have to do to communicate, to say, here's what's going on. And the same thing, I want to know what Israelis see, what's going on that side as well.
Thank you, Aziz. Yeah, the seeing the other only through the hate, only through the violence, is something that's very common in this conflict. We only come across the other when it's violence, and that frames the whole perception of the other. Obviously, in an asymmetrical conflict where the system does favor one people over another in a often most egregious ways. Michael Lerner would like to ask a question. I'm not sure if I'm unmuting Michael or if he can unmute himself, but we're gonna find that out in 1 second. Michael, can you unmute yourself, or do we need to unmute you? Okay, while we figure this out, I'll just ask the next question that's in the chat.
Okay, now you're
muted. There you go, Michael.
I figured it out, Gilly.
You.
I figured it out.
That's great. Fantastic.
I'm the editor of Tikkun magazine in the United States, and we've been against the occupation since the beginning of Tikkun in 1986, and have lost a lot of our potential supporters for insisting on the immorality and stupidity, both of the occupation. I'm asking you now. I've heard so many moving speakers, all of you in this session, but I'd really like to be able to have a way of reaching all of the speakers today both in the big program and in the several smaller breakout groups, so that I could invite some of them or all of them to either write or be part of an ongoing conversation in Tikkun about these issues. And I'd like to also, if there's a way to get a video or some copy of the event, the big event, I'd like to be able to put that on our website so people who didn't know about this could hear it again. So I do want to say thank you so much, all of you in this session. Brilliant people and very moving people. But I was actually crying through a lot of the larger session. I just couldn't stand. It's so frustrating to see how the beautiful tradition of Judaism has been skewed into an oppressive, a justification for oppression of my fellow human beings and my brothers and sisters, the Palestinians. And I also was in prison for fighting against the war in Vietnam, and so had a lot of the experience, similar kinds of experiences that Alden had. So anyway, I just want to bless all of you for all that you've done, and help me find a way to reach out to get the emails so that I can reach out to the people both in this thing and in the larger thing.
Thank you so much, Michael, for all you're doing. Just be in touch with me, and I'll help you figure all this out, how to reach out to people and ask them to contribute.
Both Eldra and I just put our information in the chat to everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Aziz. The next question is from Asaf Miroz. He asked, do you find resemblance between the choice of Obama, who perceived as an unattainable target, and what now is perceived as unattainable? I just like to say that when the Black Lives Matter after George Floyd protest happened, I never imagined, I focused on protest in my practice. I never imagined I would ever see or experience, or that it's even possible to see what I saw on the streets of New York City after George Floyd was murdered. So the question is kind of what we think is attainable. What kind of future is, if I had to play on that question, what can we dream is possible in this process of self-empowerment and a pursuit of justice, both in Israel, Palestine, and in America?
That's a big question there. That's a big piece. And speaking from personal experience, when I hear someone ask about what can be dreamed and what can be possible, anything is possible. What can be dreamed and what can bear fruit is anything. The mere fact that I'm sitting here talking to you today and not dead or still in prison demonstrates to me that anything is possible. I was serving life in prison plus 17 years, natural life plus 17 years. The fact that I am here today, the leader of an organization that serves people who are incarcerated, that serves youth, and I am allowed to go back into prison to speak to these individuals, to be of service to these individuals, is what I like to liken as a miracle. Miracles aren't just things that are in books 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years old. Miracles happen every single day if I am open to receiving and seeing them. So anything is possible, again, as people. If I'm willing to go beyond systems and get beyond systems and get beyond my self-limiting beliefs about this is the way it always has been, so this is the way it has to be today, and this is the way it always will be. Excuse my French, that's bullshit.
Yeah, I fully agree. I can look at what, from practical point of view, and Palestinian Israeli side, you look at the map of politics right now, and you think the potential of a real solution has become so small, because you look at just what kind of coalition would in a government in Israel would really lead to an agreement. Even if there's a left-wing coalition, it will include Yisrael Beitenu and like a very right-wing organizations for Israel, that would make it really hard to come to any negotiated settlement. So that seems very unattainable. If we are, this whole Palestinian, the PLO was excited about Biden renewal of potential negotiations. To most of us Palestinians, that was a joke, because we're like, what's the point? We've negotiated forever. So the way I look at it, and what I hope is eventually attainable, is a people's movement, not a government-led movement. I look for, and it seems harder still today to do, but I really hope that it would happen, a popular movement, similar to what Mubarak Awad was talking about earlier, a popular movement of Palestinians that are not really anymore buying, and most of us aren't buying into the political charade that's happening now. That's what I look forward to. And I know that's possible. It happened in the first Intifada. And when it did happen in the first Intifada, it did affect the realities even in Israel. You had a huge number of people who were having problems serving in the army because they were told to go and arrest people like my brother from their home, beating them up. That made some people conscious, wake up and saying, I can't do that. So I really hope that's where we end up. And then eventually, whether we end up, I have obviously my views of what the end solution should be. I think we focus too much on that. If there's a will to end the injustice, then the solution will be easier. But as long as we feel like, yeah, let's just drag this negotiation because we can't agree on whatever. If we believe end of occupation, end of oppression is the goal, then it is possible. It is, I think, attainable, even if it feels it's not right now.
After George Floyd, when the protests start going, I saw more white people than I've ever saw before, especially young white people protesting for racial justice in numbers that were really incredible to see. And same in Palestine, when I see Jews and Palestinians together, which is rare, but it is a thing, and it's growing. The realization that we are all captive to the system, whether we benefit from it or not. We are all pay a price in some way. We're all under oppression, obviously without equating. In that process is extremely powerful in what can be imagined. Nancy Bernstein, dear friend, asks, Eldra, do you think any movement in the U.S. towards a true reckoning about the historical and ongoing oppression of people of color in the U.S.? If so, what would you attribute it to? I don't mean to suggest that the system of racism and trauma are not ongoing. So is there progress, and what do you attribute progress to?
what I would attribute progress to is what you just spoke about, is the next generation, those young people that you saw in the streets following George Floyd, the way that they think and what's acceptable to them is very different than the way that the old guard thinks and believes in those systems. These young people are growing up with so much information available to them, with so much technology and the reach and the things that they can learn about other people, other nations, other cultures and other backgrounds is infinite. The amount of knowledge and education that they have at their fingertips, and they're starting to wake up and be presented with what has been going on, and they're not happy. So that's what I see as progress, or where change will come. It is in the next generation. It's in the young people standing up and demanding that their voices be heard. I'm seeing where young folks are breaking away from their families because they're realizing that what they were indoctrinated to in their household doesn't fit for who they want to be and how they want to show up in the world, and how that is impacting other people in the world. That's where change is coming from. That's where evolution is coming from, as I see it.
Thank you, Eldra. Aziz, what about Israel-Palestine? Is there a, I mean, this ceremony is an extraordinary reality that's created on the ground, that shows that something else is possible, that there is another way other than conflict and hate. The ceremony is growing every year, which is extraordinary. And apparently we had more viewers today than ever. And in person, it's also growing with 10,000 people in the center of Tel Aviv, and also in Palestine. Is there progress, and what do you attribute progress to?
Is there a progress? I think there is a progress in the sense more people realizing that something needs to be done and the status quo is not sustainable, and us waiting for deliverance from wherever, somewhere, you know, whether it's America, whether it's Israel, whether it's a Palestinian Authority, it's not going to happen. That's the progress, is being able, you can't really make change unless you realize where you really are, what's the problems that lay before you. And so in that aspect, there is a progress, but there's also a lot of disappointment, a lot of fear, and reality on the ground has gotten worse for people from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So that makes people have much harder lives. So it's kind of a mixed bag in that. And I think we will see progress as we start organizing more and more, and start organizing more and more together. Look, one of the things I love about what happened today in the ceremony, even though it's something hard, I think hard for some Israelis, hard for some Palestinians to see this being joined. What I like about is what I shared earlier, is us Israelis and Palestinians offering what we could call a joint resistance, not just a joint dialogue, not just let's only sit and talk. And that's important for the beginning stages. If you don't know the other, you need to learn, you need to understand. I work a lot in that. I offer tours for that, just to get people to understand what the other narrative is. But it can't only be learning about the other. At some point, it becomes joint resistance with each other. Just like you mentioned earlier about people protesting together. I remember it's very different when I'm at a protest and I'm getting tear gas and we only Palestinians together or being shot at. And when, I don't know, I was in Nabi Saleh once and we're getting tear gas and shot at, and I look at the guy next to me and I realized it's Elek El-Hanan, who's, I think his brother speaking in a different room, whose sister was killed by a Palestinian suicide bomber. And I see Elek next to me, and the two of us holding each other's hand, trying to run out of being tear gas. And there's something powerful about people seeing that. There's something powerful about Palestinians also seeing an Israeli coming to protest with us, being in harm's way with us, and he's not anymore the enemy. It changes the whole concept. And that to me is the most important progress, because the more we create that joint resistance together, that we are in it in all ways, we're not just talking and each one goes to his home, but rather we are trying to figure out how together we create a change on the ground.
Thank you, Aziz. And Avi Manor would like to ask a question. I think I can unmute, ask to unmute. Okay, Avi, here.
Hi,
Okay.
thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, Avi.
Do you hear me good? I don't know if my microphone. Yeah, cool. Thanks. First of all, thank you so much for this talk. It's really, it's very deep. Thank you, Eldra and Gili and Aziz. Thank you so much. And I wanted to ask a question. It's like sort of, it's kind of a big question, also, and also general, also for Eldra and also for Aziz. But just a question of, I mean, from hearing both of you, I can't even imagine how many hard things, I mean, you saw in your life and such difficult situations that you met with your heart. And I want to ask a question of, sort of like the question is, what do you do to, in the end of the day, to still, you know, still stay in love, and so much love, and stay with such an open heart? I mean, it's such a difficult thing, you know. Also for myself, I feel like I'm also in Jerusalem. I grew up here also, and, you know, experiencing so much hatred and so much racism and so much oppression. And I mean, like, a lot of times I try to understand how do we do this? I mean, how do we keep on going to be with our hearts open, to create love inside, also inside us and also outside? I mean, how the spaces that you talk about, Eldra, and like Aziz, you didn't talk a lot about the things that you do, but I mean, in creating spaces that are spaces of love and spaces of you know, of all this. So it's like, I don't know, so I don't know if you understood the question, but it's like, how do you work with this in your life, in your heart, in your soul, with the people around you?
Thank you so much, Avi. What grounds you in this work that, you know, can often create a sense of need for revenge and need for resentment and hate to when facing injustice, basic fundamental injustice? What grounds you in this thing?
There's an old saying that's way older than I am, and it goes, if you're not a part of the solution, you're a part of the problem. And for a big part of my life, I was a part of the problem, and I know what it's like to be fueled by anger, to be fueled by violence. I've been that person. I've been in that space, and I don't like that person. I don't like I don't want to be in relationship with that person. So what fuels me is who I am today, and what I get to do, what I get to feel. When I was that person, I was very disconnected from my own personal humanity. And when I'm disconnected from my own personal humanity, I am my own oppressor. I then begin to project onto others. And the same thing that's being done to me that I'm talking about, you know, being dehumanized and being oppressed, it makes it very easy for me to do that to other people. And that's not who I want to be. That's not how I want to show up in the world. And that's not what I want to leave in this world for my children. So what fuels me, what pushes me, is that even the pain, I get to feel the pain. I get to feel the sorrow right along with the joy and the peace and the happiness. And I get to make a choice. That's power. I get to make a choice. I don't have to be anything that I don't want to be. The power of choice is what fuels me.
Yeah, in addition, I fully agree. And that's, for me, very powerful, is not being a prisoner of my own creation. Because when my brother was killed, for 8 years, I eventually realized I was living for the person, or I was being a prisoner of the person who killed my brother. Every time I hated, I was empty, I was bitter, and I thought I was working for justice, because nobody none of us really admit it, maybe even to ourselves, that we are working out of anger or out of revenge or out of hatred. We think we are working all out of justice, and I had to really face myself. And this is something we all have to do all the time. What's my motivation for what I do? You might do the exact same thing, but your motivation makes a big difference. Am I motivated out of anger, out of hatred, or am I motivated out of justice and out of love? And you could do the exact same thing. The two different motivations change it. The other thing that really inspires me to keep doing what I do are the stories of the people I meet. You mentioned those spaces of love, those spaces of relationships. It's just, like I said, I don't see people as an us versus them anymore. And my business partner, I run a company, is a Jewish American. It's not very common for Jews and Palestinians to run businesses together. He's my brother. We know each other for many years, and we argue, we fight, we agree, we disagree, but we truly brothers. And when we first started working together, people weren't him and weren't me. How could you work with an Arab, you know, kind of like the video we saw at the end of the ceremony, and people will come to me and like, don't trust the Jew. And it was crazy. And now our staff are mixed, Israelis, Palestinians, and look, we lose tons of business because of it. There are many Jewish groups, there are many Arab groups, there are many Christian tour groups who refuse to travel with us because they see my name, or they see his name, or they see our manager name, and they say, oh, you hire those people, we're not gonna work with you, you're not trustworthy. But at the same time, we see so many amazing relationships, amazing projects, things that I would never have expected happen. And those stories, every time I see one of those relationships happen that are pushing for change on the ground, that just gives me so much hope. And I saw it even in my family. My nephew, 6 years ago, was beaten up by settler group gang and dislocated his shoulder. And he was able to escape. And he put on Facebook the story. And this is a kid who grew up, his uncle has been killed, he's seen cousins being killed. And he put up the story online. He says, I don't want, he was 18, maybe then 19. He said, I don't want anybody to use my story for hate. And then he said, actually, I was beaten up while I was out buying food because I was hosting Yuval. Yuval is a tour guide who works with me. We were hosting him for dinner. I was hosting an Israeli person for dinner in my home in East Jerusalem, and these guys killed me because they thought I hate Jews, you know, because I'm Arab, not knowing that's not the reality. So stories like this, where I feel in some ways I might have saved my nephew, because he could have instead went home and picked a knife and went to stab someone. But instead, because he knew Yuval, he knew these guys, he knew that they're not his enemy, he didn't right away go toward violence.
Thank you so much for these powerful words. We are coming to the end of our conversation, and I just want to say that when I spend time with families who lost children and parents and siblings to this conflict, and saw the darkest, most dark of places, and in a process came out of it with self-empowerment, turned that pain and that despair into self-empowerment. I'm deeply inspired of what is possible, what human beings can do. And I want to say, before I let you just say some closing remarks, that the racial justice movement in America, since I live in both cultures, is deeply influential to other struggles for equality and justice. What we see on TV coming from America, you know, the tactics, the chants, the strategy are deeply influential in how other people fight for equality. The change there, we live in a world that is very connected, and every advance done in one can be used in another. So these connection between the struggle for equality in Israel, Palestine, and the struggle for racial justice and equality in America are deeply connected, even if it's just subconscious, because it seeps to our to our ecosystems of struggle. So on that note, just if you have a few remarks to end this difficult day, where many of my friends are mourning the loss of their families to violence, and maybe some words about nonviolence and how nonviolence is really the only way forward. So just a few remarks to end. Whoever wants to start, and then we'll bring it to a close. Maybe Eldra, you can start, and Aziz, you can end this.
Certainly. One thing that I would leave with that is inspiration for me is there's a man that I engaged in a lot of this work with while I was incarcerated. He was incarcerated. We were both serving life. And he's a former white supremacist. He's got tattoos on his body from his neck literally down to the top of his feet. I was the best man at his wedding on a riverboat. He and his wife babysit my son. That is what is possible. There was a time while we were serving time where we would have killed one another just because. That's what's possible. That's the world that I live in today in my circle.
Wow.
Thank you for that.
I don't feel like I should say anything after that. Thank you, Eldra. I agree. I just want to say, don't let indifference, don't let the problems discourage you. Don't disconnect. We need you to stay engaged. We need you to realize that encouragement, working with us, joining us in this mission is really essential for us to make a change. A few people can't do it. We need as many of you to be with us. We can try, and we'll continue to try, but the more we bring more and more people to join us in this struggle, don't feel because you're thousands of miles away, maybe if you're in the US, that you can't be part of it. I think we need everyone to be in this struggle for justice. And you will be inspired because you will have stories just like the one Eldra just shared. And there's nothing more fulfilling than being part of these stories.
Thank you so much, Aziz and Eldra. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. Please sign up for Combatants for Peace or American Friends of Combatants for Peace email. Join this work. Join us dream. Join us resist. Envision a better future for freedom and dignity for all people. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And thank you so much, Eldra and Aziz, for your wisdom. Thank you.